Hi there, and welcome to the Seven Figure Authorpreneur Podcast, where we empower authors with tools, resources, and inspiration to build prosperous book brands. I am your host, Octoria Robinson, and today we will be interviewing Casandra Merritt. OMG, guys, we have our mental health expert back once more, Casandra Merritt. How are you?
I am wonderful. I'm wonderful. And thank you guys for having me again.
As you guys know, monthly, she's bringing some really impactful knowledge and wisdom and resources to help sure we are mentally prospering in our journeys as authors. So I know you all have been enjoying the topics. If you're a first-time listener, you want to go back and get caught up, guys. Today, however, we are going to talk specifically to those of us who feel a mission or a calling to write on an area of trauma in our life, and we are concerned, but if I write about it, how can I avoid experiencing a setback? We're going to get started today letting Casandra to define what is trauma.
Well, I want to start by saying this is such a very, very highly sensitive topic. And, I just want to let anyone who's listening that if this is your first time exploring trauma from an author perspective, just be ensured that you are also seeking the right proper care in the backdrop of all of this, because you never want to set yourself up for failure in your writing experience. And so with that being said, I want to use a definition that I did not create, but I actually pretty much practice by, and it's from the Substance Abuse of Mental Health Service Administration. And they define trauma as a behavior health concern that requires a healing and a recovery process.
Wow. Wow. Whew, that one just hit me because I am a nonfiction author as well that writes about trauma from my past, and that so clearly articulates trauma in such a great way. How can a person sharing their story about their trauma, utilizing the definition that you just shared, be useful to others?
Well, one of the ways is, this is so good because the primary way that it can be useful is helping someone actually either address their trauma, or if they're going to write about their trauma, then actually allowing themselves to process through that trauma. I think that's one of the ways to start with. That's just one of the ways to start.
That's so good. You're bringing me back memories of when I wrote my first book. There were so many sensitive spaces in my story that I felt like extremely vulnerable when I began to explore them. And I had so many questions and thoughts and concerns going through my head. Am I sharing too much? Am I sharing too little? What are people going to think about me if they know this thing about me? And it was just so many fears swirling around my mind, and even some stress. And I'm sure there are many authors or writers out there that are wondering, okay, Casandra, I recognize that my experience can help others heal as well as I can heal while processing it. But how do I know when I'm personally ready to write about my trauma in a way that's beneficial?
I think a couple of things. When you realize that the impact of that trauma, and when you understand the paths that you took to recover.
Wow. Did y'all get that? I know you probably had some more to say, but you just dropped a big one.
That is key. Wow. That is key. When you have to realize it, because if you don't realize the true impact and you begin to try to write and talk about trauma, you could really either one or two things: be setting yourself up to only be re-traumatized, or you could actually cause greater trauma to the person who has not even explored their trauma.
What would you say, right in the same vein, Casandra, because this is so good? Now I'm going to put on my publisher's hat. I've had so many
Okay.
nonfiction authors that have come to me who have been attempting to write their story for umpteen years. They get to a certain point and they stop. Would you say that that is an indication that maybe you need some support in processing your trauma before writing?
Absolutely, because what tends to happen is, and I was thinking about this even before you asking this question, and it's going to be in one of the keys when I said, avoid self pity and write from healing. Because when you try to write out of a place that you haven't actually even explored, or it's coming up too emotional, that sometimes you're writing from self-pity. Now, I don't want anyone to think that their trauma is not, I'm saying their trauma not is not important. All trauma is important until you address it. Once you address it, some trauma is no longer about being the importance, but it's about letting someone know the freedom to getting from trauma.
Wow. That segues really nicely into my next question for you. Why is it important that we know our personal reasons for writing about our trauma?
I think that the thing with trauma, it has no boundaries. It doesn't care about age. It doesn't care about gender. It doesn't care about social economics. It don't care about anything. And so it's important that you know what's leading you to write about this trauma. And if in my personal opinion and in my therapeutic knowledge, I believe if you're going to write about something, you got to know where it's coming from. If I was to write about trauma and I have been a victim of trauma, I am only going to write from the place that I've been healed. Because if I write from the place that I first understood trauma, it would have all been out of pain. And it would have been out of pain and disgust for what happened to me and why it happened to me, versus, you know what? I've overcome that this person, I was sexually abused, and how I know that I was overcome because I gave that thing to the Lord and I allowed myself to heal through something that I had actually no part in, while yet I was a victim of. But it wasn't my choice.
Cassandra, there's something that I often say to authors. I would love to hear what you would add to it. That our journey is for us, and our stories in the written form is for others. How would you say that that ties into what we're talking about in terms of trauma and knowing your reasoning for it?
I think I would probably say, I know I keep going back to these points, but I would probably say my source to the healing, or pointing someone to the source of my healing and then writing to the freedom of it, is what I probably would say. Because you, myself, nor you or anyone actually chose the course of the trauma. We just had to walk the course of it. And so I believe when we write to the freedom of that, that is what the people will see. But we actually experience all of the negative pieces of that. And so I think that's what I could add to it, in my understanding of it,
Wow, wow,
is
wow.
that, mm-hmm.
That was so good, so good, so good. Now, this one, guys, hang on to your seat. I'm sure this is one you've been like waiting and hoping that I would ask. How much detail should an author go into when sharing about trauma when they're writing?
I think that is that's such a sensitive question, but I think it's a valid question, and I think that you should only share as much detail as you are free, and because don't share anything that you are not prepared to be scrutinized over, questioned about, examined about. But when you are so free in your deliverance process of trauma, you can write anything about trauma and be okay with anybody saying, well, why did you feel that way, or why do you say what you say? And that was something I had to come to grips with. If I'm going to talk about trauma, I have to be ready for the people that are going to challenge my past trauma. And because I'm free from that trauma, I can answer anything that they have to say, knowing that I'm free from it, and only being able to point them to who set me free from that trauma.
Wow. So is it fair to say that how much details you share is really personal?
Yep, it's a personal choice, but I believe, Octoria, and this, guys, is really just my own personal experience. I believe your details are shared based upon how free you are. And so if you know that you are no longer bound up by someone taking advantage of you emotionally, you can share that pain of that past emotion without actually having to re experience that pain. So I believe that.
Now, it's also been my experience that we have to be careful in that same area, because if we're uncomfortable with exploring certain areas of our trauma, we have to make sure we're not trying to, in our writing, bring healing to others in there. We,
Absolutely.
especially when we're in that nonfiction genre of writing. It isn't to say that you don't have anything valid to say about it, but you have to be willing to go there if you're going to ask others to go there with you. So I appreciate you for really clarifying that and empowering the listeners to understand that yes, it's personal, but you also have to accept the responsibility on both ends. If you're unwilling to talk about it, then you might have to reconsider what you're going to be writing about as well. Wow, 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 wow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That beautifully well said. Because we can have so many ideas about what we should tell others about trauma. And while others need to be informed and educated about trauma, and that's why they call it trauma informed care. Because when you are informed and you've been trained and you understand what it means to inform somebody about informed trauma care, you write from that place of informing them, educating them, empowering them to shift into freedom, not to keep on being in self pity.
Wow, wow, wow. Y'all keep hearing me saying wow because that's all I got for you. Wow. Is there a way for us as authors to write about our wounds and it won't sting us again?
You know what? That I thought that was a great question too. I'm just about to burst open here, guys, because I said the answer is no. You might always feel a sting. You might always feel a glitch, but you don't have to have a breakdown moment or a crushing moment or a reliving the experience moment. But I always think it's that small reminder that keeps us gracefully humble to say that, I remember I once was, but I am now this. I am no longer a victim. I am no longer a product of that type of trauma pain. But you know what? That sting is no longer a bleeding or open wound or a place that can be infected, but it's always sometimes for some people a rememberable sting. But it's like a little pinch, like, oh yeah, I remember that. But guess what? This is what brought me to this place that I can speak now into healing, or I can now share my story without, having to have a relapse moment. So I just think sometimes the sting is there to remind us, but the sting is not there to bound us up in the trauma again.
Guys, what I gather is just because it stings doesn't mean I need to stop.
Yep.
That stinging, especially again for us nonfiction type writers, is that sometimes cultivates the greatest type of content. Because I recall writing about my story 15 years removed from certain aspects of it. And what that sting did was make it real for a moment
Uh-huh.
again. And I was able to
Uh-huh.
provide sensory details that were not a part of my present life because I am healed. But that moment where I intentionally chose to go back to a place of trauma to inform others and help them heal, it allowed me to write so authentically. So, guys, again, I am not a mental
I,
health expert. Thank God for Casandra. But from the publishing aspect, sometimes that gives you such a creative edge to really tap into the story like you were there yesterday.
That's so good, Victoria, because I was going to say the same thing similar to you. If we treat the STEAM like in trauma informed care, and for those that don't know what trauma informed care is, it is simply being trained in such a way that you could take all the pain, all the everything that you've experienced and turn it into such great material that it keeps reproducing itself and that it begins to be so much content that you will have book series and not just a book.
Writing from freedom. That thing stuck with me when you said it earlier, girl. Woo! Wow, wow, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So let me move on to our next question. How does trauma impact the creative process of a writer?
Ooh, that's good too. Because I think if you let the trauma lock you up, none of your creative writing comes out. There are not, I feel like what happens is where now you can come up with great processes and great steps. You know how sometimes in AA they say the 7 steps or the 10 steps or the 12 steps. That's the real one. You now don't get to explore those steps and those processes that are locked up inside of your trauma because you are not free. And so what happens if trauma impacts you in such a way it causes you to internally shut down and not see the creativity that has come out of something that we felt and knew as traumatizing as now can be trauma revolutionizing, to change somebody's mind, change somebody's life.
Wow. Did y'all hear that? We gonna be some trauma revolutionizing writers up in here. OMG. That was good.
Yes.
I mean, you're really literally taking me back in the days when I was writing Unraveled Potential. It took me nine
Wow.
months. I mean,
Wow.
that
Wow.
was my story, but it took me 9 months to write from this free place that you're describing.
Yeah.
It took me.
And that unraveling, yeah. I mean, think about that book. I remember that book. I read that book, and just the cover alone would draw you in. I mean, it just a beautiful cover. But the unraveling of that rope that was on there was like that process of just being untangled from all of that trauma. And just imagine everybody that read that book or going to read that book is just being unraveled. And that's why it's so essentially important to us as authors to be free and to be very whole to the best of our ability concerning our trauma. Because when we put great content out like that, or we put misconstrued content out because we're writing from self pity, we can be untangling someone and they don't realize how to get really free.
Wow, 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 guys. I know you are just wowing up a storm like me. Wow. I have a question here now that I believe is going to be really impactful and assist many writers who might have
Okay.
found themselves to get stuck in the emotional process of writing. How can we perform emotional triage if trauma unexpectedly pops up in our manuscript?
I think that, ooh, yes. Well, when you think about triage, just from a medical standpoint, there's a whole lot going on in an environment like that because it's so many moving pieces and there's so many moving emotions. You just think about it like that. You have so many moving emotions as you're writing and so many details that are popping up sometimes that's when you want to take a pause and make sure that now you are going to be able to share the validity in that process, even though you're experiencing that pain, but you want to pull back sometimes as a writer just to examine to make sure that this is not something that needs to be counseled or rethought through, just to make sure that you are really good in that place, because it's triage is very sensitive. And that's where you have to address wounds, that's where you have to address hurt, pain. You really have to address a lot. And so sometimes when it pops up, as a writer, you might have to take a small break, look back, and really examine that place where you're next to write from.
Guys, and I feel the need to say this, that a small break is very different than procrastinating. what
Correct.
what Cassandra is teaching us is to how to be intentional and get ahead of pain causing us to procrastinate and eventually give up. And I'm certain that some of you who are listening have been there. I've been there. I'm sure Cassandra has some
Mm-hmm.
experience with being there. There are things sometimes we believe we are called to share that hurt, that are embarrassing, that may try to make you feel ashamed. But as Cassandra said, there's nothing wrong with asking for help, seeking help, pursuing the help that we need, and taking those intentional breaks so that we can always write from this free place that she's been describing.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that we can be these trauma revolutionaries out here. We can be using what should have hurt us traumatically, and now it be a reason why people in this world are living victoriously. I am just like, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Now, my next question is, how do we who have walked through trauma that involves people we care about, how do we avoid hurting them when we're sharing our trauma in writing?
Well, always keep in mind, people. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Every event of trauma can be a heavy burden. And because we deal with people, families, community, people, all that kind of stuff, we got to remember that we don't want to give people spilled blood. We want to, it's like having clean hands and a pure heart, that when you are connected to others, and because we all are connected to others, we want to ensure that I have so much to say about my pain, that I don't express my pain in such a way that it begins to make Octoria or whomever start thinking about their pain. And that now they're taking on my pain upon their pain, and nobody is really dealing with that. And so we all experience it, but we have to make sure that it's not leaving a lasting negative effect on other people, and causing them to have difficulties communicating with us or just being around us, because sometimes it's easy to do. The research, and I really took time to think about this question, because the research has shown that trauma experiences associated with behavior health and chronic physical health can definitely be exposed on family members, because now we cast our burdens on them instead of casting our burdens on the Lord or whomever your community of source is that can help you with trauma informed care.
Wow. You know what this made me remember too is that I had to learn to not write because I was angry, but to write because I was
Mm,
free. And if you find yourself
yes,
still angry, bitter, and I'm not trying to say you don't have the right to walk through those emotions, but we're speaking about writing and producing content that others will be consuming. If you're still in that place, guys, that doesn't mean you don't have a valid or valuable story to share. That just means you still have a little more healing to experience. When we write, we should be writing from a
absolutely.
free place, because our writing should be sharing that freedom and helping others enter into theirs. This is so good. This is so good. And I really want to make sure our listeners have some things that they can implement and really use in their writing journey outside of everything you've shared, which has been so good. So, Cassandra, if you could please share 7 things authors should avoid or embrace when writing about their trauma.
Okay, so, woo, this is a good part, guys. So, 7 things you want to know. And some of these are avoid and some of these are to embrace. So, the first one that I would love for you to embrace is to forgive yourself and the offender. That is a huge place right there. Forgive yourself and the offender. And then I want you to embrace creating a safe community. And what that means is your practitioners, which is like your mental health counselors or people who are free from their trauma so they're able to help you retain a good headspace of writing. And so that's one. And then the third thing is point them to the source of your healing. And then write from freedom for freedom. Then I want you to avoid self pity and write from healing. Pace yourself, and then check out a mental health professional or your doctor or someone like that just to make sure that you're good. There are people who come to therapy once a year just to make sure they're good. And then ensure that you're not writing from a place of self-inflicted trauma.
Wow.
That's the 7 things.
Guys, I'm sure you're like, I want more, I want more, I want more. So do I. I want more. I'm thinking we're definitely going to have our mental health expert, Cassandra, come back and give us more on this topic. But as we conclude, I want to make one mention of one thing, and then I'm going to ask Cassandra if you could share a resource for our listeners to continue to grow in this topic. But we had a question that I needed to circle back to because we brought up, how do you avoid hurting people you care about in your writing? I want everyone to understand that there's also a legal aspect to that. When you're sharing people's likeness and image in your writing, you want to make sure you understand legally how to do so. And before you mention a name or mention a story that includes someone, you need to have certain things covered legally. So make sure you either are working with your attorney or doing some thorough research or working with your publisher to make sure you're covered legally. Okay? All right, now I want to get back into give it over to our mental health expert to share a resource on this subject that we've been covering.
Okay, so one good resource is definitely a mental health professional, whether that's a doctor or your doctor or maybe a counselor of sort. Make sure that that person has some informed trauma care experience. And for those of us that believe that Jesus is just our final source, remember, Jesus empowered us and he's empowered me. And he's gifted many to also find safety in the multitude of counselors. So that is true. But when it comes to informed care, you want to find someone who either specialize in it or no. So that's something of your choice. And then again, guys, you can look up the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. They're like my number one source because I know that they have tested and tried and made sure they have real truths and facts and statistics and reports. And so they are a wealth of information for those that are writing. Just need to know how to use the right language and to even know if what you're saying has validity when it comes to trying to ensure that someone is pointed to a place of freedom. So those are my primary resources right now, because everybody's book on trauma is not written to address your trauma needs. So I won't refer a book at this time, but I will refer mental health professions or Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, because they have a wealth of information and free resources to help you recover.
Now, Cassandra, it just dawned on me that I feel a sense of responsibility to address this one last thing. That if during their writing process, someone begins to suffer from suicidal thoughts or ideas of hopelessness, what would you refer for them?
I would tell them to tell you, refer that you immediately call your suicide hotline, or you can immediately go to any medical center, any hospital, local clinic, and they will be able to service you. Again, if you are feeling any type of suicidal thoughts, ideation, you need to go to the nearest medical center, or you could call the suicide hotline, and they will address your needs.
And we will definitely have information on the suicide hotline because, guys, we understand that trauma is real. It is sensitive, but we believe through the power of Jesus Christ that we are made more than conquerors and that we can share our testimonies and help others overcome. With that said, would you mind just giving us a small prayer to pray over our listeners as we enter into just this powerful place of writing?
Yes. Father, I thank you for every listener on this line. I pray, oh God, that they have just a saturation of your presence, and that God, they are able to capture every single moment of creativity that's concerning their trauma or their past trauma. And I pray that they're able to write in such a way that it brings people to freedom, and that it really transformed their lives, oh God, just as we have said, trauma-informed care. So I thank you for what they are going to experience, what they've already experienced, and I thank you that their writing will be so strategic that we won't have room enough to publish all those books, that they will write such great content. In Jesus' name, amen.
Wow, guys. So you have the tools. We've shared many resources. Our mental health expert has provided so much wisdom on this topic. We want to encourage you to know that Casandra and Start Fresh Counseling Center is not just available once a month on our podcast, but they're a resource that's available for you if you should need it. So certainly we encourage you to consider utilizing them if you are seeking mental health support in your journey. I want to close by saying, guys, let's implement these things. Let's be sure to execute them. And I believe by God's power, we're going to prosper together, authors. Take care.